This is the TechCurrents podcast, real talk about technology and stories from working in the tech world. All opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the host and guests. And now, here is your host, Sam Cavalier.
And thank you for joining us again for this episode of the TechCurrents podcast. I am your host. I am Sam Cavalier, joined once again by my very good friend and co-host, Ron Mellinson.
Hey, Sam. Good evening. Great to talk to you.
It is going to be a terrific episode tonight. I am really excited for a number of reasons, not the least of which is having the opportunity to reconnect with a longtime friend. Somebody. There's a lot to be said about Laura Metzer. She spent 24 years, almost just under 24 years at Microsoft in two different tours over 34 years. During this last tour, she was in a leadership position and served, I guess it was almost as a chief of staff, principal director kind of role for multiple teams.
Yeah.
And really what I think is probably most noteworthy is the fact that after you were laid off, you took that as an opportunity to move into something that was your passion and go looking for something else, and we'll spend some time talking about that. But of all the other accomplishments, the most noteworthy for me is that I was introduced to my wife because I was attending a conference and speaking at the Florida Government Technology Conference, and Laura was the account executive for Florida governments. And so I was asked to speak by Laura and so I went to that conference, and right after a cocktail hour, I was sitting at a bar in Tallahassee and had the first conversation that I had with my wife. So there we go. And that was, 27 years ago.
A long time.
So, yeah.
There were some fun times in Tallahassee.
Yes, there were a lot of good times in Tallahassee. Uh, yes, there were a lot of really good times, a lot of fun times in Tallahassee, a lot of things that I not too soon forget. I think I don't think Laura knew this, but I know the only time I ever had to barricade in my hotel room was while I was working a project in Tallahassee. So the only hotel room available was in a motel on the outside of Tallahassee. It wasn't in the city, it was on some outside, and there was all kinds of crap happening outside, and I had jammed chairs under there and all kinds of stuff to block the door.
Yeah,
Well,
we only
you're
send
not
Sam to the
talking
best
about
places.
like revolt or anything. You're talking about weather, right?
Yeah, no, it was
No.
it was no, it was
Revolt.
yeah, it was like there was something happening, people, gunshots, whatever, and I just like jammed stuff in the door. I'm like, Jesus, what the hell place did I find? I would have been better off driving home, but didn't want to drive the 3 hours back to Jacksonville every day. So there you go.
Yeah.
But so yeah, and so Laura, welcome to the podcast. I think this is great. It's continuing a recent tradition of us connecting with Microsoft alumni, folks that we had the opportunity to work with over a very long and storied career that we've all had, and the noteworthy things that you know the people that we've connected with over the years are doing, and specifically like what you are doing now is incredible, especially in light of the circumstances that the tech industry finds itself in. So I mean, if you don't mind, let's introduce what you've got going on now, and what you've done and kind of how you got there.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Sam. And it's so good to see both of you again. Like I just can't get enough of the reminiscing. That's the fun stuff. We'll have to do more of that later. So, it's kind of kismet really right now, that I've gone in the direction that I've gone in, because the need for mental health counseling is so large. It's growing, it's expanding, for a variety of reasons, right? But one of the big populations for me that I care very much about is people who are displaced workers, particularly in tech. And I'll tell you why that is in a moment. But so I got that phone call in February 2023. I knew it was coming because I got, how they move people around, and when you find yourself moved to something that you didn't choose, and that it is kind of a neutered job, you don't really have any kind of power at all. Uh, Nobody really understands it. You don't either, so you're trying to make stuff up. you know, uh, it was one of those positions, and so I knew that it was coming. And in fact, when my boss was telling me, a very, very wonderful guy, by the way, um, I went, dude, we were having one-on-one since November. I was sharing with you my business plan for the next year, and you knew all along I wasn't going to be doing that business plan. Like, how hard was it for you to keep that a secret? I mean, that stuff weighs
Yeah.
heavily on
Right.
people. So, there's a whole population of people really weighed down by this, and those are the managers that have to just march the orders. It's just awful. But I knew, first of all, I'm going to do the Rip Van Winkle thing. I'm going to get some sleep, and I'm going to, repair myself for a little bit. And uh, I'm not going to look for a job in tech. Um, this is, I'm over 60 now, and you get really reflective in these stages of your life. And Eric Erickson's model of life choices and stages. This is a period of stagnation or generativity. And I had that choice. Am I going to feel really badly about myself for the loss of a job, which, by the way, I don't feel like I lost a job. I feel like the job lost me, which I think is an important way to reframe it for people.
Sure.
And I just said, it's time for me to really go back to what I kind of started in my early 40s and pick up the ball and go back and get my master's degree in something completely not associated. And so I'm almost done. I'm on my last class. I have some internship stuff to still do. But during that period, I went ahead and got certified as a counselor in the state of Washington. So I am practicing and seeing clients. And my licensure officially happens, I think, like next spring. But I just knew I couldn't sit around. Uh, I've got hobbies that I love to do, stained glass, gardening, friendships. Um, but you guys know this. There's a certain DNA in us, or it was learned behavior when we were there, uh, that you got to keep going, doing things, learning, growing, and I knew I had to do that. So I went back to school.
That's awesome. And you and I were talking briefly before, but it's a great Renaissance story to actually be able to reinvent yourself at any stage of your life and truly follow a calling. And the calling that you've been following, we're going to talk about it later, is truly helping and supporting others and the giving back and the mental health piece. I know we're recording this on June 5th. We missed May.
We tried.
We did try. Schedules and things didn't work out, but May was Mental Health Awareness Month. Super, super important time for a lot of folks. And the downside is it's the 30, 31 days and that's it. And people forget about it. And, by the time you're in July, it's, about stuff on the barbecue and beers in the backyard. And people forget how important like mental health never sleeps. It doesn't take a day off. 365, 24 hours a day. There are people struggling, there are people thriving, and there are people in the middle. And just the simple fact that you've kind of not only adopted what really drove you, but the reality of why, the desire to help people and
Mhm.
help them through some really tumultuous times.
Yeah.
On LinkedIn, the last couple of weeks, and Sam, you may have seen this, there were actually more than a few, unfortunately, posts of people who made the ultimate decision, and they chose to exit this world. And because the challenge is, they felt that the world would be better without them, their families would be better without them. And I was really taken aback by the number that I was seeing, because it seemed to be a kind of an uptick, but it could have been mental health months of folks who are more open about it, maybe not as much in December as you would be in potentially May. You know, one of my stories, the early stories for me, why I got into doing what Sam and I are doing, is I met a person who was an ex-Microsoftie, and he was really down in the dumps. And I touched base with him about 2 years ago. He was going through all the stages, talking about how the world would be better without him, his family would be better without him. He was struggling. He just couldn't really get anything underneath, no wind under his wings. And everything was rejection or ghosting. And he was really deeply, deeply depressed. We were very thankful we were able to get him some help. He's gainfully employed now, turned his life around, but he needed someone like you to be that ear and to listen and understand. And what you've gone through, I think, brings a real, I guess, a real aspect to it, because you're just not book smart. You didn't just take a class, and Sam and I joke all the time. We've got so many people who are counselors and experts who claim they are on LinkedIn because they watched 3 things on YouTube and 3 things on TikTok, and suddenly they're like a coach and a mentor.
I
But
like the coach thing. Yeah.
yes, a single with a shingle. Anybody can do it. But I think you've lived through the experiences, and then you've opted to dedicate yourself to helping others through challenges like this. And I greatly appreciate that. So I'm going to shut up now. And I really am interested in hearing from you
Mhm.
things like, how did the job loss itself, right? How did it kind of affect your sense of identity, especially
yeah.
in
That's the
careers
big
like we
one.
have? Okay. Careers like we have, we'd kind of define ourselves through the role, right?
Well, like I
I'm
said, we grow up there.
That's it. Yes.
exactly.
Like we
Yes. We
have
grew up there.
key milestones that occur during this time that kind of weave together with your identity of being a Microsoft person.
Yep.
So yeah, it's tough. So you know what? I'm going to back up a bit and tell
Sure.
you about what was happening to me towards the end of my career before the layoff really happened. And it was kind of shattering, to tell you the truth. So I was sort of I was the chief of staff for the West Region services business, and then the consulting, things they couldn't decide what they wanted to be, consulting or not, whatever. So things kind of changed overnight in that department. And the one thing that held true was I care a lot about people, and COVID was happening at the same time. So as the chief of staff, I was devising things with John Crossley, how do we keep our people not feeling isolated? How do we keep them feeling like they're contributing? Then the George Floyd stuff started happening, and the world got really heavy, and it's continued to get heavy since that time. But for me, during that time in my career, I was happy because I was doing work that I cared a lot about for people and getting a lot of, feedback back that it was making a big difference. So we get out of COVID and, found myself in this really innocuous role. And I knew I needed to start interviewing because it didn't feel like it was really going to go anywhere. I moved from Florida out to Seattle. I live here now, and I did that because I wanted to extend my runway at Microsoft. I thought I was going to really pretty much be there forever. Um, which now in hindsight, I'm so glad I wasn't. But I was interviewing for jobs, and I was interviewing for jobs where sometimes I knew everybody that was on the interview team. I had actually hired several of the people that I'd been in different interview groups with, and I wasn't getting the jobs. It was, oh, you did so good. Everybody loved, that trite kind of stuff. But, just, we went with one other person, you were definitely our second. And it's like, how is this? How is this happening? People know my CV. Um, they've worked with me. Like I said, many occasions I hired them. There was one role that I interviewed for that would be managing the team of services sales folks, of 6 of them in the West. I hired every single one of those people on that team, and the job came open to manage that team. And I was like, here, don't look no further. I onboarded all 6 of them. Again, I'm the shoe-in for this, really. And the hiring manager went with an external Price Waterhouse person or something, whatever. I came with the business plan. I hired all these people. I knew exactly what we needed to do. There was no onboard or ramp. And I hired this person, and 30 days later, the person left the company. He didn't last. And I thought, well, I'm feeling a little bit like ageism is coming into play. And that isn't somebody who's not owning what my deficits might be or areas that I needed to work on. But age isn't something you can work on. It's like, I mean, it's there. And so I was already beginning to do that self-doubt kind of imposter syndrome thing. Like maybe I really wasn't any good at any of this to begin with, you
Yep.
know? So
Totally.
I started that like inner conversation. And as we all do, we have our inner talk tracks. And sometimes they go off and take a left turn or a right turn, and it's hard to get them back. And it's the negative talk tracks, wasn't worthy, didn't deserve this. Boy, I was just lucky, fate would have it, all of those things. And so when it actually came time for this, I felt a little bit like it was a gift. Um, a lot of people, and I hesitate to actually say that because there's a lot of people who do not feel like this is a gift. That
They don't. That's right. 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 Right.
it is disaster time for their family right now, financially, relationships. Um, a lot of grief comes out of
That's right.
job
That's right.
loss.
But I heard the same thing, by the way. I got laid off about 3 days before my birthday, and a former coworker who had been laid off 6 months prior, she told me, she goes, "You don't know it yet, but they just gave you the best birthday present that you could have gotten."
Yeah.
And I've said it before. I know I remember telling Ron, and I'm like, and she was right. I didn't necessarily feel it right then, but it didn't take long for me to come around really quickly to that's exactly right. It was a gift.
Yeah. Well, so this person told you, well, this is going to be a gift. That's kind of on my list of, I kind of have this mental list of what to do, what somebody should do or not do when a friend of theirs or a colleague finds themselves in being displaced, whether it's for poor performance, which please remind me to get back to that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was one of my.
we're
Yeah,
gonna
I've
come
got that
back
as
to
a
that
hot
one.
topic.
Yeah.
Or business reasons.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend telling somebody that.
Yeah, I
But
was gonna say, so there's like that whole laundry list of things, like, it's for the better.
right, 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 right.
You're lucky. I wish I was in your shoe. You're like,
Right, right, right.
the really false, I'm here if you need me. Well, this is the scoop. If you care enough about the person that is maybe reaching out to you, or you've learned of this, you be the one proactive in reaching out to your colleague and oftentimes your friend. and do what friends do and drop them off something to eat for their family. You know, send them a book. Call them up and go, let's go take a walk. You know what?
Yeah, and that's it's
Thursday at
actually
noon, let's take a
really
walk.
important. That's actually really important because I think the thing that is not necessarily clear to folks if they've never felt, and this isn't just about being laid off, but when you start to go, and I've covered in a number of podcasts my uh, adventures in going into pretty dark places. When you're going in that dark direction, you suddenly can't remember who you can call, or worse, you don't actually think you can call all those people. So any of those people. So you see yourself at you're the whole imposter syndrome. Well, more of the negative self-talk that comes in is the whole notion that you don't have any friends. You don't have anybody that you can call. You are
Well, and there's
completely
shame.
alone.
You know, shame is a
Yes.
powerful thing. Um, and the feeling that you're less than them now.
Yep.
Um, those are so damaging to one's psyche. Um, yeah, absolutely. So that's why, you know, do not do the trite thing of, let me help you if I can, you know, just let me know what you need. Well, you could come up with three things that they need before you even like before you even said, let me help you, you know, what do you need? Well, help them out, you know. Also, you know what really surprised me is the people who stayed with me. You
Right.
know,
Right.
there were people, so, you know, a lot of people reached out because I've worked with a lot of people over decades. And a lot of people reached out and it was very touching and I was very grateful for that. And then nothing, right?
Okay, then gone.
Except for a handful of the least expected people. You know, the people that apparently, you know, you had touched in one way or another, that felt connected enough with you to be there with you. You know, I worked with a lot of really wonderful people at work who you guys know this. You have a ton of fun, a ton of laughs. You go through life's up and downs. You know,
Yes.
marriages, divorces, raising children. You know,
Yes.
all that
Yes.
stuff.
All of that.
Um, and those are the people that I've still not heard anything from. You know, I mean, and so now I've accepted that. That was a part of grief, but I've accepted that and fully embraced the people that did reach out to me because their hearts seem to be in alignment with my heart of what it is to be a friend, you know.
It's funny. It is absolutely funny you should say that. Because similarly to me, to what you described, I mean, I did not get laid off from Microsoft. Um, but it was one of those things where the writing was on the wall that I was getting shown the door. And it was, worst kept secret in the office, to the point where, and to this day, it helps drive what I'm doing. So this goes back to 2011 when, I attempted to move to Seattle. I interviewed with the product team, and we were getting to the point where the offer was coming. Reviews dropped, and I had an untouchable review. Nobody was going to touch me. And so now there was, from that point, there was no choice. The door, my choice was the door. And before that could happen, two people reached out. So the practice manager for MCS in New York and the people manager, the PDM, separately both reached out to me. And and the PDM was a consultant at one point, and I never forgot this. She said, when I was brand new, you helped me learn what I needed to do to be a consultant. You let me sit with you at your customer, and you helped me. She goes, I've got an open head count. You can have it. We went through the interview process. It was awful. Like it was because I wasn't technical. I'd been in sales for 5 years. I wasn't technical anymore. One of the senior cons that was interviewing me said, I don't even know why we're talking to you. And all I know is that I was told I had to. And when we got done, she said, listen, it doesn't matter what he said. The job is yours if you want it. And it was at that point that I was like, yeah, it's time for me to go. I'm okay with that. But more importantly, I never, and I've told her this on a couple of occasions, I never ever forgot that. And so at that point, damn said, if I can do something to help somebody else who is, in a position where they can't find work or they're in a bad spot, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And and I've never forgotten it. And that's kind of, those are the things that we never forget. Those people, like those people who reach out. Like when I told Ron I got laid off, he immediately called. Now that's
Yeah.
not going to come, anybody who knows us, that's not going to be a surprise to anybody. But
Yeah.
and you're right. There are people, the person who I spoke to who said it was a gift. Now, notwithstanding the fact that you probably don't want to ever say that to somebody, I didn't take offense to it because I kind of was already coming around to that kind of line of thought, so it wasn't really, it was no big deal. But I think there were people that I was working with who would have been surprised to find out that that was the phone call that I got.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah. So I don't want to make this about poor me. It's surprising
Right.
because
Right.
it isn't just about me. I belong to a couple different women's groups and whatnot from Microsoft, and it's a common theme. If somebody would have just bought me over coffee and sat down, that kind of thing, or how important and how invaluable networking is, and how easy it is if you've developed a network over time to go ring some bells and go, I need your help to help somebody out. I mean, if you've got somebody that you care a lot about, that you've witnessed are great contributors in a business sense, that are not done by any stretch of the imagination, go work your network for them.
Yep.
Go be their advocate. Don't just say, here, I'll get you an interview. Be their advocate. There's a really big difference between, getting somebody a job interview and advocating for them. Night and day. So
Yeah, this is true. Agreed.
I wanted to reach back, Ron, on something you said, because it's the most alarming part of this trend of people with mass firings. That's happening. And that's the tenor and tone of what people are expressing in public places like LinkedIn. I belong to quite a few different Facebook groups that are specific to that, and similar to you, have seen some things that made me want to go drive over to somebody's house that I didn't even know, because I was worried about, what their outcome was going to be. So mental health is something that I think the stigma's been lessened over time, particularly since we all collectively went through COVID, isolation, loneliness, depression, substance abuse, all that stuff that happens when you're at a place of, I don't know what's going on in my life. Um, you know, the thing is, when you see people suffering, be prepared to give them tools and resources and direction to help them with their suffering. So I have a ton of resources for people who are struggling. And I'm going to use LinkedIn to follow up to this podcast with some directions for people. If you don't, if you're out there and you're listening, or you've gotten this link and you've listened to it, message me through LinkedIn. I will absolutely find you a direction for resources and help. So I wanted to make sure that was put out there. I'm going to stop there and take a drink and let you guys maybe ask.
No, that's good. So yeah, so thank you for that, and thanks for that offer. So one of the things that you'd mentioned, and I just want to double click on it, is there's still a stigma and a shame surrounding being quote unquote laid off. Now Microsoft just announced another. For those of you who work with Washington-based companies, I monitor the WARN notices that get posted. So every company in Washington State, I believe if it's more than 15 people, they have to file a WARN notice with the state that gets published. It is a forward-looking 60 days. And Microsoft just released one for another 300 people. That's just Seattle. Now there are WARN notices in every state, but Microsoft had one for about 1,600 people about a month ago, and they dropped one again on Monday of this week for another 300 in the Seattle area. And if you roll back a few months ago, our friend Mr. Zuckerberg was talking about getting rid of his lowest performers, and they laid off thousands of people from Meta, and all of them have an albatross hanging around their neck. Not only the shame, air quotes around the term shame, we'll just say just psychological shame, but now they're also being categorized by a world-renowned leader that they were let go for performance. And if you look, and I know several of the people who were impacted because they were ex-Amazonians or ex-Microsoft folks, and they were stellar and still are stellar. They're amazing people. But the baby was thrown out with the bathwater and then given a label, and that label was low performer. So, not only are you dealing with the stigma of a layoff, right? Like, oh my God, it's a capitalistic society. I should be working. So I have guilt for that. My family's looking at me. They need me. They need healthcare. We need this. We need that. And I'm blaming myself. And we all know who can watch it from the sidelines. And we understand that in a layoff scenario, you ended up in the wrong cell of a spreadsheet. You were an amazing person. You just ended up in the wrong column. And that column was we need to let this person go column. Or I'm sorry, we're eliminating the role, not the individual. Because Sam, if you remember Microsoft, we did things business blind.
Yes.
And I ran the original Niagara when we downsized consulting services, and anyone who was basically a consultant or lower, consultant 1, consultant 2, or associate was let go because there was an expectation that professional services and Microsoft was going to be an elite organization when a new leader came in. So we ran through all those scenarios, and it was just a simple matter of you are as amazing as you are in the skills that you had, you were just in the wrong job at the wrong time. And we let over 1,000 people go just based on title. Now, I know Mark Zuckerberg did talk about this job action, and I think he did it specifically to ease the impact in the street, because a lot of other large tech organizations were laying people off, and they were getting blamed by folks. A lot of venom was being pushed that way. Then Zuckerberg came out and said, well, we're getting rid of our low performers. And I think the street took a breather and a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, so they're actually getting rid of the poor performers. In the reality, they did not. They were really, really amazing people, but they're struggling. I've got 3 or 4 that I'm mentoring and working with right now, helping them redo their CVs because they haven't interviewed in a decade. And they're spectacular individuals, but they're thrown in this you're a low performer bucket.
Well,
especially if you've got like 10, 20, 30 years under your belt, and that you have contributed. So this is an awful thing to say somewhat, but my job was eliminated. So I didn't, have to suffer through, well, you were a poor performer. And I happened to get the severance package and whatnot, which helped bridge and certainly helped made the decision to go re-school myself. There are people who aren't getting that,
Right.
Yes.
who
Right.
deserved it,
That's
who are
right.
not only leaving with the moniker low performer, they're leaving with nothing.
Right.
And so I think my biggest disappointment, and I will directly say at Microsoft, but certainly, the cohorts of companies that are like them, is not having established a guiding principle somewhere that says we will make sure that we acknowledge these people are human beings. Like think about folks who just bought a new house or moved their family from a different
Right.
country
Yep.
and are now facing having to go back there, and maybe sometimes in dire circumstances. People who may have medical situations. I've seen a lot of those. Like I was just on leave and I just got fired, I mean, so this idea that we didn't use a guiding principle about people being humans with real human needs. Because if that was used, the outcomes would feel different. There are ways to for heaven's sakes, Microsoft has a lot of cash in the bank, right? I mean, there are ways to take care of your workforce instead of hiding behind this low performance mantra that is being, chanted. Yeah, it's just, if they could have just stuck with that principle, I think things would feel different. Let's think about the managers who have to fire the people. And, oh, by the way, have had to work through the stages of low performance that, people who work there understand what their steps that are involved with that,
Right.
knowing that it's not true,
Right. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That they've been boxed into actually having to do that.
I,
I
I,
will tell you that
that's going to
I
weigh
have
on
heard.
somebody's soul for a while.
Long
Well,
time.
yes, yeah, well, at least it should. I've heard that even in some cases, what some of the companies are doing is they're changing the lifeboat drill. So, at least when we were growing up in the organization, you had the option of being meets expectations. You had exceeded expectations, meet expectations, and was below expectations. Now, nobody wanted to be meet expectations because that was not great. But imagine if that wasn't there. And so your choices are you either are getting a 5 or a 1. That's it. There's nothing in between. And that's kind of where they're at now. Where, you know, you can't just do your job. You're either doing more than your job or you're below the line. You're a low performer. And to me, and I have actually been told by a manager of people right now that at some companies this is what they're being told to measure people, and I'm like, that's insanity. I'm like at that point it's pure insanity. Like, you're literally telling folks that your job is to kill yourself. You have to kill yourself to do above and beyond, or you're going to be rated a low performer. That's, to me, that's nuts. Now,
Yeah.
we might have done that when you were younger. You might have gone ahead and did that, but that was listen. I know I did it voluntarily. When I was sitting up, we joked for years about me falling asleep with my face on the keyboard and waking up with the chiclet looking thing on the side of my face. I did that voluntarily. That was, I didn't feel like I had to do it. I felt like I wanted to do it, so I just did it. To me, that's saying no, you got to do it, or you're in the bucket. You're in the bucket with the target painted on you.
Yeah.
To me, that's insanity.
Well, and then there's all the people who have to wake up every day, go about work, wondering if is today the day?
Right.
Because
Yes.
so many people are being let go that were critical contributors. So when you're seeing that, you're seeing some of these people leaving, you're like, oh my word, why not me? And so now you're going to work feeling like that every day. Like, when's it going to happen?
And that's tough,
and-
right? You're
and that-
working with a
right.
dark cloud over you.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, that's tough.
I always felt like I had Microsoft behind me. And I really did. They were they treated me exceptionally well. I consider myself eternally blessed for the experience and the relationships. Um, so I don't want this to be, a diss on this. It's a matter of better planning and better execution, right?
So let's go back to what advice do you have
Yeah.
on folks who've been impacted this way on kind of rebuilding their confidence? Because you're walking out the door thinking, I'm not worthy, I'm tagged as a low performer in the news, and
Your identity
everybody,
shaken.
yeah, and I have to go home now and see my family and see my friends and you know what do they think of me, right? So you have that the devil and the angel on your shoulder, but the angel's long gone. So now you have the devil who's constantly tweaking, yelling in your ear that you're not worthy, you're not good enough,
Yeah.
and this is just a culmination of your imposter syndrome, and they finally caught you,
Yeah, they
right?
finally,
Yeah.
yes,
So
yes,
like,
yes, yes.
what would you recommend for folks to and you'd mentioned, you spent a little time, we'll just use the term grieving on the scenario. So you spent a little time investing in yourself, sleeping, kind of just taking a little, you tagged out for a little bit to kind of get your head square.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of interested in best practices and recommendations you might have for folks who are experiencing that. Like,
Yeah.
how do you take those baby steps to have that angel start popping back up on the other shoulder and,
Yeah.
put tape over the mouth of the devil who's yelling in your ear how bad everything is. So I'd love to hear
Yes.
ideas on that.
It's the perfect question, right? Because if anybody's, having this experience, this is the practical stuff. So, um, there's the pre-layoff, right? And there, my advice in that area is invest in building your resilience. Sam and I were talking, I seem to have a word of the decade. Again, a while ago, my children will say it's perspective. My son bought me a binocular for my charm bracelet because perspective was my word about, living life. And now it's resilience. Because listen, beyond the job thing, difficult things happen to all of us. None of us are unscathed in the disappointment, challenge, loss department. So working on building your resilience, and there's an excellent book. I have to find it here somewhere because I think it's an important one for people to think about. And I think resilience, especially as some of us are aging, is a really important skill to develop to help you recover. Resilience isn't something, like that happens to you. Resilience is how you respond. These things are going to happen. How you respond to them is going to define how healthfully you exit the situation or manage through living with the situation. So building resilience, first of all, everybody needs to be doing that. And I'm going to give you a book. And, that's where seeking counseling really helps in things like doing cognitive restructuring, you know, um, recreating a new narrative about your experience. Because again, you go back to that imposter thing. It's really important to take a hold of that, tear that thing apart, and rebuild the real narrative. One that's going to serve you well. So getting some help, reaching out. There's plenty of organizations, particularly the National Association or the National Alliance for Mental Illness. Um, Anybody here locally, it's a national organization. So you could just go to NAMI.com and they have, I facilitate one of these groups here locally, but they have peer-to-peer support groups that aren't therapy, they're support. And sometimes support is the thing you need. Others who've been there, done that, so valuable. So helping change your mindset, maybe building your muscle before something happens through resiliency, reaching out to peers, being with others that are in the same circumstance as you, and taking care of yourself, do the sleep, do the eating. Um, don't don't feel overrushed to go solve this problem. Of job loss. Sometimes financially you can't help it. It's like I have to do this. Well, there are ways. Talk to a financial planner, about how can I get myself a couple of months to really size up and evaluate what my circumstances are so I can build a more logical plan instead of an emotional plan. So I mean, there's tons of things you can do. I tell this, mental health affects all ages. And the one thing that I'm seeing a lot of, and I suspect that this population is exhibiting this, is isolation. And the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, in the last administration, had his whole platform was around how detrimental isolation and loneliness is to not only your physical health, but your mental health. Um, Isolation people who are self-isolating out of the shame, the guilt, the I don't know what to do, confusion, all that stuff, is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day on your body. I mean, that's a what? Um, I'll actually post that story on my LinkedIn, the whole published paper, because it should really point out to people, it may feel good to isolate, and I may think I'm doing self-care by isolating. You're not. We are born social people. Social connection is vital to our mental health. It can be small groups, it can be one-on-one relationships, but it's the people. And for those of you who have people in your lives, like fathers, mothers who've lost their jobs, be on the lookout for these kind of depressive behaviors, not wanting to talk, sleeping way too much over an extended period of time, appetite issues, maybe even behavioral changes, quick to anger, or have become overly anxious. So there are warning signs about that. And then there are things that can be done. Somebody, and I speak from my heart on this one, somebody who is in the throes of deep depression, which I definitely struggled with during my time at Microsoft. And I was actually very vocal. I did a lot of speaking out about how important mental health wellness was to performing your job well and living your best life. I will always have depression, but I've learned how to manage through it. Depressive syndrome and depressive symptoms are all the ones that I just described. But the person who's in the middle of that is not going to be reaching out, is not going to be looking to solve things. It is covers over the head, all the self-doubt, like it is very painful to be in that place. So if you've never experienced that before and you're bumping up against somebody that you've known that's struggling with job loss, just be fully aware that that person will likely experience depression during this period. Depression can take you to dark places. So be a helping hand. Get them to a support group. Go with them. And again, use me as a resource, because I will find you where I think you need to go. So
So one of the things we've seen is people immerse themselves in social media.
Yeah.
After a layoff, and it becomes a pity party. And one of the things you'd mentioned is this social idea of finding others who potentially are in the same boat as you. It feels like it's a bit of a double-edged sword. because
It,
if I'm in a bad place and you're in a bad place, we will both be in a bad place for a long time because we will feed off of each other.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
echo chamber.
Right. And at some point, one of us needs to break that cycle and realize that we're just not healthy for each other, and then potentially find different people with which to engage. But from a social media perspective, we talked about this ad nauseum on other podcasts. You can pretty much find anything that you're looking for as an echo chamber, and you can find like-minded people to validate your biases and the way you're feeling. And it takes a significant amount of effort to pull yourself out of that rabbit hole or circling the drain, whatever, however we want to talk about it, because it pulls you down and you're with somebody who's also not lifting you up. And then any recommendations on dealing with scenarios like that, recognizing scenarios like that? I mean, I've tried to tell people that if you don't walk away from an interaction with another human being, I don't want to say happy, but at least not any worse than when you went into it, is
yeah.
usually an indicator that that it was an okay interaction, right? But if you walk out of there and it's like, I know I'm worthless and nobody's getting jobs and everybody's getting ghosted and the world sucks, and I this isn't for me anymore. Okay, that it becomes a downward spiral that's really, really hard to pull yourself out of. So thoughts on what recognition of that negative vibe from another human being and getting off of social media to do it?
So spot on. So I will tell you, the social media craziness that people dip into is an addiction. So,
It was built that way. It was built specifically. The dopamine hit was by design. It's ridiculous.
Anybody that's enjoyed TikTok knows what that feels like, I mean, so it's like treating an addiction.
Mhm.
You've got to first recognize that it's a problem, or somebody does an intervention, like, a spouse or whatnot. This isn't serving you well anymore. I'm watching what this is doing to you. The time that you're invested in doing these things could be time discovering a new interest, could be building a new network. My number one thing, and I think it's my effort to try to break the COVID outcome, is in people connection, in person. I mean, being with somebody, having coffee. I just did this yesterday with somebody that worked in a different company that wanted to talk about maybe revamping her career and stuff. And, I met with her for coffee, and it was so lovely just to sit face to face with someone. So back to social media. I don't know if you guys know Blind, the website, that whole Blind effort. Well, that is all about feeding on bad stuff. And when you're in the middle of bad stuff, like I was, I toyed around with Blind and looked at and saw, what others were saying until I felt it was getting really unhealthy. Like I didn't, Ron, you made a great point. When I left the experience with Blind and went and did something else, I felt worse than before I started scrolling on Blind, so treating it like something that's not healthy and finding ways to replace that with things that are healthy. And a counselor can really help you with that, can guide and journey through that with you. Don't be, like I said at the very beginning, the mental health stigma has kind of diluted a bit. I think that will just continue more and more over centuries. Like, we're mental people. A lot of our world comes from within. So I've totally forgot my train of thought. That's exactly what happens at my age now these days.
No, that's fine. And it was on the social media,
Yeah,
down the
understanding that
drain
it
thing.
is healthy,
Yeah,
recognizing it,
right.
Right.
And that's
getting
that's
help.
the challenge. I mean, the problem, and Sam mentioned the echo chamber piece, right? it feels good when you find like-minded people, even if they're negative,
Right,
you
right.
know. And
Well,
you're right.
misery
And
loves
misery does, yeah,
company.
exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
That's
and
exactly right. And by the
it's
way, don't
so
be the
unhealthy.
person to try if God forbid you're the person to try to point out, hey, you know what, this might be taking a wrong turn because now, yeah, so they'll turn their ire on, they'll turn their ire and attention on you. Um, and I guess the last thing the one thing I would ask about, and Laura, you and I talked about this previously, is, when you're in that negative headspace and you're finding more like-minded people, there's a tendency to try to assert blame somewhere. There's blame that's got to be somewhere. And that's
That's such a human nature thing to do, though, because it helps us what we're trying to do is make sense of something that just doesn't make sense to us, you know. So that's really common. There's this I got to get that book for you guys too, but there's a quote that Maya Angelou has is like, I can't change the things that have happened to me, but I can accept them, and I can decide whether or not to be reduced by them. So in her quote, I refuse to be reduced by the things that happen to me, and that's what like my call to arms are for people. Don't let this life circumstance reduce yourself to yourself or to others around you. Um, you know, uh, it doesn't have to. I think I'm an example of it doesn't have to. I live the cycle. I live the pain. I live the self-doubt. That, oh my gosh, I'm old. What am I going to do now in this senior citizen state that I find myself in? Um, uh, you know, um, Surround yourself with people who love you. And if you can't do that because you're in the throes of depression, hopefully somebody around you can help you find somebody. And if they aren't helping you, reach out to me.
I can't stress enough what you said earlier about somehow getting out and meeting with people face to face. I mean, when I got laid off, there were a number of things that happened. I I put a huge amount of um respect and kudos onto Ron for reaching out like immediately. One of the things that in some cases I would say I understated is, you know, I was part of it's generally no secret. I bowl every Friday night, and I bowl pretty much year round. I did the fall winter league ends, the summer league spins up, and we might take 1 or 2 weeks off and go back, and it's pretty much the same group of people. There's a core group of people that are all part of the league every single time it goes around, and they're just real salt of the earth folks, and nobody, it's a judgment free zone because, bowling is a very, I don't know, historically it's a very blue collar kind of, just like everybody kind of, and being around folks like that week in and week out made things just a little easier. And I was seeing them every week, and we were just kind of, in some cases we chilled out, and that's it was nice to have. If I wasn't doing it because I've spent so much time working remote, and I've talked about that countless times, having that that's on my calendar. It's on my calendar. It's on my agenda every single Friday. I'm 4 or 5 hours at the bowling alley with the crew in the league, and it's hard to not come home if I've had a bad day. It's hard to not come home in a better mood just from being around people that are just trying to have a good time for the night.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like you can reach out. We all live in communities, right? There is hardly a community to be had that doesn't have opportunities for socialization, volunteer opportunities, getting engaged in community. I mean, one of the best ways to feel better about yourself is to reach out and help somebody else. So volunteer opportunities. I mean, there's never a shortage of what you could do to help in your community or even broader. There's so many things. Um, but again, if you're struggling with that depression, actually I mean, people aren't getting out of bed, picking up the phone or searching for something to go do tomorrow isn't going to happen. They need
No,
to,
fair. That's fair.
they need to, they need to heal themselves and restore themselves to a point where they can participate in that plan for betterment for themselves.
Yep. Oh, sorry. What else?
Yeah, it's okay. I'm just looking to see. I had a bunch of questions, and you've hit almost all of them, Laura. So I greatly appreciate you doing that. And it was kind of it's never linear, which is fantastic. So I appreciate it. I'm just making sure that there was nothing that important that I missed.
I live my conversations non-linearly.
All right. So I'm just looking through the the one thing you did mention is this time to grieve, this time to heal, right? And that also can become a slippery slope. Okay, you can find yourself sleeping till noon every day, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The flip side is you could find yourself up at 5 o'clock in the morning, sending out 100 applications a day.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no time compression algorithm for getting that done, right? So you send out 100 on Monday, there's your likelihood of if 99 of them were the wrong place, you just did it for the sake of doing it, then the probability of you landing anything there is not going to be any higher than if you sent one good one. But I guess what I'm trying to think about is how do you time bound yourself and say, you know what, a layoff just occurred. I'm going to give myself a week to heal and then I'm going to get back at it, but I'm going to get into it in a structured manner and I'm not going to let it consume me. All right. Because I've seen it on LinkedIn a lot. I've sent out 600 CVs. I've gotten zero interest. Nobody's responded. Now,
Yeah.
arguably, 598 of them may have been to roles you were never really,
Yeah.
good for. You're just shooting, pretty much scattergun approach. And then you see the other side where people are just they can't, as you mentioned, can't even get out of bed. Right? It feels like there's a happy medium there. Like you give yourself maybe, I know everyone's different, but as a rule of thumb, a week to think about it. Is it a day or two to think about it? I mean, we were at Microsoft, we all got quotas. You could complain about your quota for a day. After that, the other 364 days, you had to go make it happen, right? So I mean, what is your recommendation on the I'll just say the grieving time or the woe is me time before you kind of put your boots on and just start, because the longer you wait, the less, and we've seen it, the entire world has changed interviewing across the last 2 years. I mean, everything you did from your last job, if you've not changed jobs or gotten a new job in the last 24 months, all your data is wrong. Everything you've ever done, all your experiences. We were still, I bar raise at Amazon. I've done over probably almost 1,100 interviews now. And I see a lot of resumes that come in, and I'm really disappointed in the ones that still have objective on top or references available by request, because these are just people who took a resume that they had that was a decade old, blew the dust off it, and threw it over the wall, hoping for the best. You know what? You're going to get a rejection on that. But how do you advise somebody to like what's acceptable and what's obsessive, right? Or like you said, going down that deep depressive path. I'm just trying to get a feel for it. Are there rules of thumb based on the counseling and the things and have seen? Is there like an average? Like most people spend a week, most people spend a day. if you're at 3 weeks of, in the covers at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because, that's a sign of depression, you need to, to get help. I'm just trying to get, for the people who listen, if they've listened this long, kind of interested in your point of view on what's, not what's acceptable, but what's the median for folks to grieve before they kind of try to turn the corner.
So, Ron, that is very difficult to put numbers on things
Right. Yeah, I know.
because everybody is so unique, and their walks in life, the way they were raised, went to school, just their life experiences, what their families like, all help go into this soup that creates who you are today. And so for one person, it might be a couple days. For another person, it might be somebody who's just super disciplined and says, all right, or may have already had experience with this. I need to pull myself up by the bootstraps. I'm giving myself 2 weeks. Um, I will say this one definitively. If you are sending out more than counted on one hand resumes in a week, you're playing the game wrong. I mean, when you cannot be using the dump and luck strategy. You've got to get really highly customized and highly personal about your job search. You got to work your network. It is through. I've always said this when I was coaching people in landing new jobs, that it's a matter of luck. There's some luck involved, but it's also your network, who you know. So you put that together and you work on increasing your luck, by making connections, and you work your network. That's the way you're going to get a job. You're not going to be blindly getting jobs through, the airline dropping pamphlets out into the cities. I'm available for a job. It's not gonna happen. But back to, how do you know? Well, I don't think that you can put something on yourself that's unreasonable.
Mhm.
So you have to be doing some inner reflection and maybe help with somebody to help you with this, on this seems reasonable to me given my circumstances. I mean, so some of it's going to be bound by, financial situations. My kids are going to college, I don't know how now I'm going to be paying for that. And so, I got to skedaddle on this plan. Um, so don't, I guess the one piece of advice that I have that like kind of feels like a thread woven throughout all of this is, don't go it alone. I mean, don't be struggling on doing self definitions and false time frames and whatnot. You've got to, and again, this is where my call to arms to the people who know somebody who's lost a job. You've got to be talking to people. It's Sam will attest to this. It's a check and balance. Like, am I crazy? Like, it's a great way to really balance. Uh, am I nervous? Should I be nervous? What does this person suggest? Am I comfortable with that? I mean, you can't go it alone. I know there's a lot of people going it alone.
Yeah.
Because you see
A
it
lot.
on like some of the Facebook areas that
Yeah.
I'm at. You know, don't you see somebody who's really kind of grieving and like, those are the ones that I've actually reached out to directly because I'm concerned about them. So people reach out to others and don't go it alone. It's hard. I wish I could, in business, we have time bound, smart objectives, measurable, accountable, time bound, all that. Um, I think if things feel out of the ordinary to you, then something is up. And people know what ordinary is for them. If it's out of the ordinary and things are taking longer, um, seek some help and advice, support from friends.
That's great. And thank you. Yeah, it's having seen both sides. We've got the outcomes are challenged if you send 500 CVs in a month, or you spend your day in bed with the binging Netflix and eating popcorn. And we're just trying to figure out like how, and I love your commentary about don't go it alone.
Yes.
And that is huge because as you mentioned before, we are social animals, and the isolation piece is it's a cancer. And it if you allow it to become your normal, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice, and that is a really bad place to try to pull yourself out of. So that's great on the
Well, and
finding like-minded people.
The concerning thing about that is the habit building.
Yes.
Our brains are designed to be, plastic. We have neuroplasticity in our brains. We can change our thoughts. We can change our actions. We have opportunities to do that. But on the other hand of that, we can build in these deep grooves of habits and behaviors that are what we come to know and what we're comfortable with, and then we're stuck. We are just cannot find our way out of a paper bag, because we've been in that mode for so long. So the resilience book that I was mentioning, I got it somewhere around here. It's about neuroplasticity. I had it somewhere. I really wanted to share it with you guys. Let me find the name of it. It's by Rick Hanson. It's Resilient by Rick Hanson. And it's all based on neuroscience, so it's informed by science. And equipping yourself with that skill is, I think, an imperative for people who want to continue to work in tech, and also in general people who live today. It's a weird world. We've got some weird stuff happening.
Well, I think if nothing else, and I think it's extremely important. The mantra of the day is, don't go through it alone. That's don't do it alone. I think that's critically important. I just, if nothing else, think that as an industry, we in tech are in a position that, despite the dot-com bubble and all that other thing that we're finding, because quite honestly, even after the dot-com bubble, those people got picked up very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I think that, as an industry, we need to realize that now we've matured, because we're finding ourselves in a position that, those of us who grew up in it have never found themselves in before. And that is, there's more people than jobs. You can't like trip out the front door and find like 10 openings that they're having trouble filling. There's a lot of talent out there for the first time in probably many of our lifetimes in this industry. And that's just something that, it's another one of those things that we have to build some resilience to, because this is what comes with a maturing industry.
Amen. Amen. Because this is not, it's not going to stop.
No.
Particularly with AI coming into the mix and its tentacles into many different vertical businesses. I think it's important to know that the decisions you're making and how you want to retool yourself are really important. You've got to be thinking about what the landscape looks like and what the opportunity is going to be, what the potential is going to be for, instability. Things that we didn't have to, like a tech job it was cream of the crop. Go get a tech job. You'll never have to worry ever again.
That's right.
That's
exactly right.
To a halt.
Yep.
That is not the case.
Those days are over.
Well,
Laura, I think this has been really, really great. There's been some really great suggestions, tips for folks who are feeling this right now, right? And I think it's important that they, if you are listening and are one of the affected recently and you've never listened before, I'll say it again. We see you.
Yes.
We see you.
I love that, Sam.
Well, and we talked about this before we were recording, and that's the genesis of this is started with effectively my getting laid off and documenting what that was like and trying to do so in a positive way. Trying to do it without no blame, trying to do it without judgment, but also acknowledging the shame that I might have felt, the um the stigma that I was perceiving, and ultimately if I were emotionally getting into a particularly bad place, what that felt like and what it meant to have people like Ron who would be there to talk to me and help you know shine a light that I could follow out of it. And Victoria has said it a bunch of times. She's like, I'm really glad, and I've mentioned this before. She said, I am glad you had Ron because I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So,
You're a
I
good
wanted,
egg, Ron.
yeah,
You're a good egg.
yeah.
That's two people who think that so far. So
I wanted,
I'm winning today.
I want, if nothing else, I want folks to be able to realize that, like, yes, we see you. We're here to provide information and to provide what assistance we want to help, and that's what we're here to do. So I think this was great, and the best part about all of this, and this is, as I said, it's kind of becoming a theme, is we're reconnecting with friends and colleagues that we might not have seen in a long time, and that is a
Oh, your
beautiful
podcast
bonus.
has so much potential for so much fun and laughter. I listened to Harry. I
Yeah.
gave up the goal of trying to do movie quotes because nobody can pass him up apparently on that. But it has so much potential, and I thank you guys for spinning it up. And I really hope nothing but growth for you all because I've listened to the topics and they're valuable.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And definitely appreciate you giving us so much of your valuable time. So especially with what you do now, like your time literally is extremely valuable. And so thank you so much for choosing to spend it with us.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Laura, it's great to see you, and I hope we can do this again. And hopefully, we're going to touch some people's lives and help them see the light and come out of that darkness and emerge in a better place,
Yeah, it
as
can
you
be
are
done.
witness.
I'm an example of it. I
Exactly.
cannot express how happy I am every day.
That's
And
awesome.
that was a foreign concept prior to all of this. So
Yeah. That is
And
outstanding. That is definitely something that if not already, we should be aspiring to do. So that's terrific.
awesome.
So for everybody who was listening, thank you. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you being there and listening to us. Very much appreciate that. For my very good friend Ron Mellinson, I am Sam Cavalier. Our guest, Laura Metzer. Take care of one another. We need to lean on each other, especially when we're dealing in uncertain times, and that's the best way we get through it all is together. So look out for one another. If you're having trouble, we see you. Reach out. Thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you for listening to the TechCurrents podcast. The TechCurrents podcast is hosted by Sam Cavalier. All content and views expressed as part of the TechCurrents podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the podcast platform, any employment organizations, or any affiliated entities. This podcast is informational purposes and should not be considered for professional, legal, or financial advice. Please consult with your qualified, licensed experts for your specific needs. This is Daniel Iverson. Thank you for listening.